How many times has liberal mainstream media mentioned Borstar or the tens of thousands of rescues that they've made? Never talked about.
Quite frankly, if you don't have a border, you don't have a country. This is the No Border, No Country podcast, and it is my pleasure to welcome today Mark Morgan, who has been a longtime friend of the Immigration Reform Law Institute. Mark was the commissioner of CBP. Prior to that, served as an FBI agent, and prior to that, I believe, served in the United States Marine Corps.
I did, and don't forget, because I think this is important, under the Obama administration, I was actually chief of the Border Patrol.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah. Well, thank you for your service.
You bet, thanks.
And so we wanted to take this opportunity, given the amount of experience and knowledge you have about the border, to talk about the situation that's going on today. Sure. So if you had to sum up in a few words the situation at the southern border under the Biden administration, how would you sum it up?
Self-inflicted catastrophic crisis that jeopardizes every aspect of our nation's health, safety, and national security to a level that we've never seen in modern history.
I think that's a good way to put it. I've been involved in this kind of stuff for quite some time, and I think this is as worse, as bad as I've ever seen it, probably the worst.
Yeah, I mean, I first of all, I agree, and I think what's very important, I mean, just like you, we get asked all the time, hey, what's your perspective on the border and et cetera. And of course, it's been very frustrating to see what I feel we achieved the most secure border in our lifetime. Now, I never said it was completely secure, but it was the most secure, I think, in our lifetime. And so to see that systematically and intentionally dismantled, to intentionally unsecure our border, of course, that's frustrating beyond words. But I think what's equally frustrating for me is that this administration, Secretary Mayorkas is leading the way. They're just simply lying to the American people about it. So it's not just about a policy difference. It's about that they're systematically destroying our borders and lying to American people about what they're doing, how they're doing it, and why they're doing it.
It's really astounding to me. I mean, I don't know if you were actually there at the hearing, but I'm sure you've seen it, where Alejandro Mayorkas got up there and Ted Cruz showed him the wristbands the smugglers used, and Mayorkas claimed that he had no idea what they meant.
Matt, that's a great example of many. I don't like calling a cabinet level official a liar. I don't get pleasure from that. I don't like that as an American. That's not good for our country. He's a liar, though. I mean, I don't believe it. Because remember, he was deputy secretary of DHS when then the secretary is Jay Johnson under President Obama, then Vice President Biden. And he's not a stupid man. And these wristbands, it's not anything new. It's been out there. The cartels, smugglers have been using those for a very long time. The fact that he actually says he's never heard of that, that's just, I don't believe it.
Well, I don't believe it either. I worked directly for him when I was the head of fraud detection and national security over at USCIS.
I'm sorry.
Thank you. It was crazy. I mean, it's USCIS is one of those agencies that people don't always understand what it does. And it really has a significant law enforcement intelligence mission as far as immigration is concerned. And, I was in meetings where all of these types of things were addressed with Mayorkas. So to hear him get up on Capitol Hill in front of Congress while he's under oath and play stupid is just more than shocking.
And I think play stupid is the right word because, again, I don't think he's a stupid man. I think his, perpetual quest to fulfill his personal ideology makes him stupid, makes him ignorant of the truth, facts, and reality. But remember, Matt, this is the same secretary that has said when Representative Chip Roy, during a congressional testimony under oath, had the 2000 Secure Fence Act blown up with respect to the definition of operational control, which in part says the secretary shall, not if he feels like it, not maybe, not if you can. It says shall prevent the introduction of all illegal aliens, contraband, weapons of terrorism, etc. And at that time, there had been hundreds and hundreds of thousands of gotaways, which I know we'll talk about. And those are illegal aliens that avoided apprehension in the United States. And Secretary Mayorkas says, yes, he has operational control and the border's secure. I mean, this guy is a known, intentional, repeat offender when it comes to lying.
I couldn't have said it better.
Yep.
So let's get to the gotaways.
Yeah.
That's one of the things that keeps me up at night after having worked in this field for so long. The gotaways, I always think of the Defense Department and known unknowns and unknown unknowns.
Right.
that famous phrase. The fact is that we can estimate how many gotaways actually got away, but we never really know how many people have managed to get into the country without being observed.
All the above, I agree with you. I couldn't have said it better myself. And Matt, I think what is a legitimate concern about gotaways that I don't think we talk enough about. I think this is, quite frankly, one of the only things we should be talking about. Again, gotaways, for people who are listening and watching, that's someone who has approached our border, who has intentionally tried to avoid being apprehended. And think about that for a moment. The overwhelming majority of migrants that come to our borders, including those that are illegally entering in between the ports of entry, they literally will sit down and turn themselves in, right? And why? Because they know that they're going to be processed and released in the United States, never be heard from again, which is exactly what they want. So if that's the case, why do we have a gotaway? Well, again, you don't have to be a border security expert to understand why there's a gotaway, because in that group, those are the people that if they get caught, even this administration more than likely will deport. And in that group, that's where you have smugglers, cartel members, gang members, murderers, rapists, pedophiles, aggravated felons. The list goes on and on. And so far under this administration, there have been over 1.7 million total gotaways. And real quick, I want to explain this though. I use total gotaways because a lot of people use the phrase, to go back what you started, known, unknown. A lot of people will say known gotaways because that's the number that CBP collects. They don't report it, right? They will not provide it to the American people. We have to get that through sources, right? But they only capture known gotaways. Well, under congressional testimony, the former chief of the Border Patrol, Raul Ortiz, which by the way I'm not a fan, but he's gone and he's retired, so let's let let's let him rest, right? But even he said during congressional testimony under oath that's underreported up to 20%. So that's why there's been 1.5 million, 1.4 to 5 million known gotaways. You add another 20%. I don't like to do public math, but that's where I get the 1.7 million total gotaways. But Matt, to your point, that's still, in my experience as the chief of the Border Patrol and former commissioner, that's still underreported. So in the last 28 months alone, I don't know, it could be anywhere from 1.7 to 2 million gotaways that now call the United States home. So that should terrify all of us.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that is one of the most frightening statistics that I have ever heard as long as I've been doing this. And just to put that in context for the people that are watching, 1.7 to 2 million is the population of the city of Philadelphia. So it's a population of a city the size of Philadelphia that is composed entirely of bad guys. Now, you mentioned smugglers, pedophiles, rapists, aggravated felons. Now, the other category is known or suspected terrorists.
That's right.
Which for the watching public is the government designation for people who have some kind of affiliation with a terrorist group or some reason to suspect that they're affiliated. And then,
we call it derogatory information. So the FBI or the broader U.S. intelligence community has some level of derogatory information that individual is either connected to, involved with, associated with terrorism financing or terrorism groups. Now, it could be dispelled or not, but it's still, that's what we have. That's why they're on the list.
And, those people come here to gather information on targets.
Yep.
And to act as the advance element for operations like the September 11th attacks.
Correct. And that's why we say, it goes back to the start, when we started this, is you asked me the question, how I would describe the border. And that's why I say jeopardizing every aspect of our nation's health, safety, and national security, right? So this is about border security. This is not about immigration, what's happening on our border. It is about border security, which is synonymous with national security. First, real quick, we talked about the bad guys. In the last 28 months, in that 1.7 million total gotaways, at the same time, Border Patrol apprehended over, I think it's around 70,000 plus criminals. 70,000 plus criminals, including 132, I believe it is, convicted murderers, thousands wanted for assault, thousands of gang members. That's who they've apprehended. So that's why I say among the 1.7, think about the number of murderers, rapists, pedophiles, aggravated felons, and gang members. Now, that's the safety aspect, crime aspect. Now, let's go to the national security aspect. And at the same time, last 28 months, Border Patrol and CBP, Office of Field Operations Support, they've encountered more individuals on the FBI's terror screening database than the last, I believe it's 5, 6, 7 years combined, Matt. This is horrific. And again, that's who they've apprehended. So back to your point, the 1.7 million total Gotaways, we literally could have a sleeper cell in the United States planning the next terrorist attack, and we would have no idea. That's why what's happening at our borders is so important.
And then there's another group, which was part of your responsibilities at the FBI. It was part of my responsibility when I was at Citizenship and Immigration Services. And this is the one that is least talked about, but Foreign Intelligence Services.
Yes.
So, I don't know, the mainstream media in the United States doesn't seem to think that the message is out and that countries with sophisticated intelligence services, which range, from China to Pakistan to Turkey, to some of our friends even, because the fact is, it's an axiom in the intelligence world that you watch your friends closer than you watch your enemies.
That's right. Yeah.
And we have no idea who's coming across from the Chinese intelligence service, from, wherever. And most of these people differ from the terrorists and the criminals in the sense that terrorists and the criminals attend the school of hard knocks. They figure things out from a practical standpoint. But foreign intelligence operatives get formal training like you went through at the FBI, like right. I went through at Department of Homeland Security, on how to conduct these operations. And they come in and they hide. And until we trip over them, or they present themselves because they think they're going to get a better deal in the U.S. than they do from their own government, we don't know who they are or what they're up to.
That's right. Everything you said is absolutely correct. In China, for example, you mentioned China. I mean, they also play the long game, right? And so they will dedicate decades to their counterintelligence efforts. And you mentioned the FBI. My time in the FBI, when I was especially in charge of El Paso, counterintelligence it really took on a whole new meaning when I literally lived and worked 10 minutes from the border. And I think it's important. So when we say national security, it's not just about the threats from terrorism, but it's the threats. It's a multi-layered set of threats, and counterterrorism is another one that jeopardizes our national security. Again, you mentioned China. We've had a significant increase in Chinese nationals entering across our southwest border. Now, the question to ask, and everybody's asking, well, why? What's causing it? And you know what the answer is? We don't know. We don't know. That's terrifying. The question you're asking, I really would like Congress to have hearings and ask, leaders of the ODNI, the FBI, DHS, a whole list of agencies, and just say, hey, can you guarantee us that potential terrorism threats are not coming across the border? Their answers will be no. Can you guarantee us that there's no counterintelligence efforts coming across the southwest border? They're all going to say no. Those are the questions that should be asked, and those are the honest answers, and that should terrify us as a nation. And I don't get it, man. I don't know why we're not screaming at the top of our lungs saying, this is stupid. Why do we have these open borders? And again, border security and immigration are two completely different things. But what this administration, the open border advocates, have done to lie to the American people is they've convoluted that. They want to make it sound like everything that's happening on our southwest border is about immigration. Because if you're against what's happening on our border, you're against immigration. If you're against immigration, you're against brown people and you're racist. That's the narrative. And it's wrong. It's a lie. It's about border security, which is synonymous with national security. Let's secure our borders, protect this country. At the same time, we can have discussions about how we can improve legal immigration. Sounds great.
The IRLI staff, number of the IRLI staff, just recently took a tour with Tom Homan.
Another great patriot.
Awesome guy. Took a tour with Tom of the border security facilities in Israel. And you raise a really good point, because Israel, believe it or not, has a fairly liberal immigration system. It's a destination country for immigration, but it has near total border security.
Correct.
And what the Israelis have done is they have said crime, terrorism, and foreign intelligence penetration, national security issues, are one thing, but who we let through the border and how long we let them stay are a completely different thing.
And they are right. We're wrong. How we're handling our borders right now, we're on the wrong side of this. Israel is on the right side of this. Think about it. Former chief of the Border Patrol, Rodney Scott, I steal this from him. He says all the time, it's pretty simple. You have a front door on your house for a reason, right? You have windows, you have locks. And it's just like your own home. Don't you think you have the right and should know a little bit about the people you're letting into your home? I mean, it's the same thing with our country's front door, our borders. It's not complex. And Matt, you summarize it right when you're talking about Israel. Yes, we should make sure that we have a system where we're not allowing in potential national security threats that want to blow up our country, or counterintelligence threats that are trying to undermine the very fabric of our nation, or criminals, murderers, pedophiles, gang members, etc. That's just common sense. While at the same time, we can say, hey, those that want to avail themselves of the greatest country in the world, here's a lawful process to do it. Right? And here's the lawful way to do it. And another thing, too, I want to make sure we mention about the lawful way. Coming and filing a knowingly intentional false asylum claim is not lawfully. And that's part of what they're allowing the migrants to do right now with their CBP-1 app and shifting things to the ports of entry.
Well, that's a deliberate attempt by the Biden administration to redefine asylum. It drove me nuts when I was an immigration judge, because asylum is for people that are suffering political persecution at the hands of their government, or in the rare circumstance where someplace like the FARC succeeds in usurping government authority, they're being deliberately politically persecuted by those organizations.
Wanting to climb the economic ladder is not a valid asylum claim. Now, we can have compassion and we can understand their need and want to do that, but the end doesn't justify the means, right? That doesn't justify them coming either illegally entering in between the ports of entry or coming up to a port of entry and filing a false claim. It does not justify that. If as a country we want to make a decision that we want to continue to expand how we help people, there's a multitude of ways we could do that besides allowing them to intentionally violate our basic laws and our sovereignty as a nation.
Well, and the problem with the current approach is if we take things like domestic violence and gang violence, which are crimes, and that sovereign countries have a responsibility to deal with in terms of their obligation to protect their own populations, then all of a sudden everybody in the world has an asylum claim.
Correct.
Because if you look at the statistics now, the homicide rates in places like Philadelphia, Baltimore, and Pittsburgh, Chicago are actually higher than they are in the Northern Triangle countries where most of these people are coming from, and claiming that they have either been victims of gang violence.
We could have Chicagoans, claim asylum from Chicago, right? Yeah. I mean, if that was the case. And Matt, you're spot on. And that's one of the things that's very frustrating is if, the United States is the only country that has a responsibility to police their own. No, that's not what it's all about. Every nation, as you said, has their own internal struggles, has their own internal violence issues. It's up to that country to solve that. Now, if there are some countries that are struggling, am I okay with us providing some assistance? Of course. And we have. The United States is the most generous country in the face of the planet when it comes to that. All three Northern Triangle countries, year after year, decade after decade, we've given them hundreds of millions of dollars. We have personnel down there. When I was commissioner of CBP, we had personnel down there that were helping them with law enforcement activities, with border security activities. We were helping them secure their ports of entry to help push up trust and reliability among the global community to use their ports of entry as an international port. The list goes on and on. USAID gave them funding and money. And I mean, we could just go on and on about how we tried to help them. Yeah, I'm all for that. But again, to open up our borders and to allow basic laws to be broken, for our sovereignty to be violated, and then for the illegal immigration to be one of the leading cause and effects of the cartel's ability to exploit that, our open border, to push drugs and criminals, potential national security threats, that just doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, I don't think most Americans realize that since World War II, the United States has given about $93 billion in economic aid to countries all over the world, and the biggest recipient of that has been Latin America. I think the other thing people don't realize, Victor Avila ICE agent, was on the tour with us. And of course, Victor was shot in Mexico while he was providing assistance to Mexican law enforcement authorities. He and his partner, who sadly lost his life in that interaction, were hunted down by cartel members and assaulted. And I don't think a lot of Americans realize that American law enforcement personnel, even some from state and local agencies, are on loan all over the world to try and assist with these types of problems and provide American know-how and expertise.
Matt, that's such a great point that just is not kind of in the lexicon of topics to discuss across the country. In the FBI, I lost track. I think they have over 70 legal anti-Shay offices throughout the world. CBP, I think, has about the same. DEA, HSI. I mean, we could go on with all the three-letter designations. The United States, their presence across the globe, trying to address global issues, help countries. Again, we're the most generous giving country, I think, on the face of the planet. And you also mentioned cartels. I tell you, Gotaways is something we should talk more about, and cartels is something we should talk more about. I keep wanting to try to push. I hope that through a common enemy, we can reduce the ideologic push and the political divide and divisiveness, and really talk about the cartels, because I think that the cartels, in my opinion, represent a common enemy for this United States that we can unite and coalesce around, regardless of your ideology or which aisle of the political spectrum you sit on.
I think that is probably one of the most important things that I've heard anyone who is an expert on this say, because I think most people think the cartels, they think Miami Vice, they think cocaine. But the cartels have really... I kind
of did that for years too, and I've been in law enforcement. I'm guilty of that, right?
Well, I think it was the reality for a long time.
Right.
Medellin, Bogota, guys in pastel-colored jackets and lots of blow. That was
right.
That was what everyone who worked in law enforcement,
80s, 90s,
prosecution had to deal with. It was very common, and I mean, drug trafficking is still one of the major reasons that people are deported. Mm-hmm. But what I don't think a lot of the public realizes when they hear discussions about the cartels are kind of like the Italian mafia became in the United States. They're a general purpose, organized crime entity, and basically they function like large multinational corporations. And they are expanding into weapons trafficking, human trafficking, sex trafficking, slave labor for sweatshops, and all those kind of things.
Yep. There's two distinct differences, I think. You bring up, the Italian mafia, back to 70s, 80s, and the drugs, the 80s and 90s. One is, I actually would say that the cartels now have advanced to a degree. They actually operate like and act like terrorist organizations. And the other difference is that they're not homegrown. We can actually defeat them. We can actually have a substantial impact on their operations if we secure the border. There is nothing or no one that comes across our border without the cartel's approval and profiting from it, whether it's drugs, whether it's criminals, whether it's migrants wanting to just escape into the United States. The list of complex, vast threats go on and on and on. And so what we have to realize is that the cartels are our enemy. I mean, the drugs alone, we've had 2 years back to back where over 100,000 Americans have died from drug overdose or fentanyl poisoning. I mean, in 1 year, more Americans died from drugs, and we know the vast majority are being pushed across our southern border, died from all the Americans that died from all the terrorist attacks, the Iraq, Afghanistan, and Vietnam wars combined. I mean, and we won't secure the border? It just doesn't make sense. And again, one of the reasons out there is that I believe that our nations, again, one of the things that makes our nations great is our compassion has been hijacked. And there's been this a convolution of that what's, again, like I said before, what's happening, this is about immigration, and somehow immigration is a victimless crime. It's not. And look, it's much more complicated, but simplistic is that when you allow illegal immigration, it pulls valuable resources off the front line. They're pulled away from their national security mission, and the cartels are able to exploit that. As the Border Patrol, for example, are engaged in dealing with those that have illegal entered, process and take care of them. Literally, there are some areas along the border where 80-90% of the border, there's no one patrolling it. It's wide open for the cartels to exploit, and that's how they're pushing criminals, potential national security threats, counterterrorism threats, and of course drugs across the border every single day, all day long. It's not mutually exclusive. It's all interconnected. It's about border security and national security.
And the interesting thing is the cartels have become aware of this,
Yep.
and they're now manipulating it.
Every day.
So they're taking one revenue stream, which is smuggling the aliens, and they're using that to distract the Border Patrol.
Spot on.
So that they can drop fentanyl over
Yep.
the border, or they can smuggle guns in. I mean,
That's exactly right. Look, again, Matt, I couldn't say better myself. You're absolutely correct. Let me give you a quick real-time example. I've been on the border countless times. So they'll have, it's an old military term called LPOP, Listening Post Observation Post. The cartels, the smugglers, will actually have these listening posts, these observation posts on the Mexican side and on the U.S. side. Right? I've been there where CBPs, their Border Patrols, their elite BORTAC unit has actually boarded a couple helicopters, gone down, and I was right there as they hit one of these listening posts and observation posts. They have sophisticated communication equipment, sophisticated surveillance equipment, and what they'll do is they'll say, and I'm oversimplifying, but they'll be communicating with each other, and they'll say, okay, go ahead, take the 100 illegal aliens, push them through Zone B, and they'll wait. And they'll wait for Border Patrol to descend on Zone B to take care of these migrants. They're in an open area. They need medical attention, etc. And while Border Patrol is fully engaged, they'll say, okay, Zone A and C are wide open. There's nobody there. Go ahead and get the criminal aliens. Go ahead and get the potential national security threats. Go ahead and get the drugs pouring through Zone A and Zone Z that's wide open because Zone B now is totally filled up with illegal aliens. That is happening and reoccurring every day, all day long, along the entire southwest border.
So that brings me to our next topic. You mentioned BORTAC, which is the elite SWAT / hostage rescue team that the Border Patrol has. But there's another unit in Border Patrol that I think a lot of people don't know about, which is BORSTAR.
Yes.
Which is, Border Patrol Search, Trauma, and Rescue.
Yes.
When I lived in upstate New York, I was Advanced Life Support EMT on the local volunteer rescue squad. And one of the guys that worked with me at ICE had been a Border Patrol agent. His name was Jeff Grant, and he was a BORSTAR paramedic. And
Yeah.
I learned
Great group.
so much about emergency medicine from Jeff. BORSTAR's function is to find and rescue people who are stranded in the desert.
Correct.
Or are drowning in the Rio Grande when they are attempting to enter the U.S. Now, that's taxpayer funded.
Correct.
It's Americans putting their lives at risk, not to apprehend and arrest people, but to rescue them.
Matt, I am so glad you brought this up. BORSTAR. I think this is a great example of a bigger issue. How many Americans do you think have ever heard of BORSTAR?
Probably not many outside the kind of work that you and I did.
Exactly. That's exactly right. And I think that's an example of why I'm so frustrated, because so many Americans are clueless about what's happening at the border, and they're clueless how it impacts them, right? If we don't think it impacts our daily lives, if you don't think that, then you don't pay attention to it, and they don't realize it. They haven't connected the dots, but it does. That's why we say every border state every state is a border state. But back to BORSTAR. In the last 28 months, I have to check my numbers. Don't quote me on this, but I think I'm in the ballpark. Border Patrol has conducted about 35,000 rescues.
Yes.
Think about that. And BORTAC is involved in some of those, but BORSTAR is involved in a lot of that.
It's record-breaking. I think a few years back it was about 1,900 a year.
Correct.
And now it has gone to 35,000. So that's like a 400% or 500% increase.
It's crazy. But how many times do we talk about that? How many times has liberal mainstream media mentioned BORSTAR or the tens of thousands of rescues that they've made? Never talked about. When was the last time the mainstream media talked about the 1,500 dead migrants that have been found at our southern border the last 28 months? When was the last time the liberal media talked about the countless number of young women and children that have been sexually assaulted and raped on their journey? When was the last time the liberal media was honest with American people and talked about many of these individuals that once they're smuggled in the the United States, then are also thrust into the life of labor or sex trafficking, atrocities that most Americans can't even fathom. We never hear about any of this.
I'm Tom Homan. The Biden administration is reversing America's progress on immigration, reversing ICE's ability to deport criminal illegal aliens, reversing job protections for Americans, and construction of the wall. That's why I've joined IRLI, the Immigration Reform Law Institute. IRLI uses the courts to stop bad immigration policies. Join me. Support IRLI at IRLI.org. Help win the immigration fight in the courtroom. Paid for by the Immigration Reform Law Institute.
Now, the thing I wanted to wrap up with is all of this is designed to protect the border. The name of this podcast is No Border, No Country, because quite frankly, if you don't have a border, you don't have a country.
That's what Ronald Reagan said back in the 80s, right? And he was right.
He was 100% correct.
Yep.
So one of the things that you've been instrumental in is getting Texas Governor Greg Abbott and some of the other governors interested in passing state resolutions indicating that the U.S. has been subject to an invasion. The federal government is not repelling that invasion. Therefore, under the Constitution, the states can exercise their authority to protect themselves. Are we being invaded?
We are, absolutely. I think IRLI is on the right side of this. Historically, what the definition of invasion is. And I'll say one last thing. Think about it. If the states had no ability to defend themselves, they would have never ratified the Constitution. I mean, one of the big reasons why they were able to ratify the Constitution is because that self-help remedy remained as a fundamental part of the Constitution. When the federal government fails to protect you, you can protect yourself.
And I don't think, when most people think about invasion, they think about, Pearl Harbor.
Correct.
Or something.
Tanks rolling across, right.
Exactly. But I don't think that most people realize the impact that this has on small border area towns, or even some of the larger border area towns. There's one statistic that sort of resonates with this for me. I read somewhere that roughly 80% of the healthcare facilities in the border zone closed up.
Correct.
So that it's reached a situation where women in certain parts of Arizona and New Mexico, if they go into emergency child labor, have to be airlifted to an appropriate hospital because they simply don't have them within a 200-mile driving radius of where they're located. I mean, if you stop and think about that, we've had so many foreign nationals come here seeking health care on the U.S. taxpayers' dime that it has forced, in America, the most entrepreneurial country in the entire world that has a crazy reverence for medical professionals, it's forced doctors, nurses, and hospital administrators to pick up sticks and move out of the border zone.
Correct.
How crazy is that?
It is crazy. I mean, sometimes when I'm listening to describe it, I'm like, is he talking about America? Well, you are. I've been on the border and I've talked to community leaders of small counties. Sometimes these counties are less than 25,000 and they get that many illegal aliens crossing in their county every week. I've talked to healthcare providers which said that they actually had to call in a mobile morgue because their morgue is filled to capacity. Or they talk about when they find a dead migrant, the exorbitant costs associated with that. And think about it. So you have to coordinate with Mexico. You got to try next of kin, find the next of kin, and you got to try to help fly the remains. I mean, that is time consuming. It's cost prohibitive for a little county. Every aspect of their resources and their finances are completely overwhelmed in many areas along the border. But of course, no big deal. New York says, that's their problem. No, it's not. Not to mention, and this is why I keep saying every state is a border state. What really, Governor Abbott's trying to do in Texas, all states should be joining him because if they cross the southern border and they're invading Texas, they're not just invading Texas, they're invading the United States. And I get it. There's some constitutional scholars that will disagree on what the definition of invasion is. They believe, and again, I'm summarizing, but that has to be a state-sponsored, army. That's just not true, in my opinion. That's IRLI's position is mine, that's not what the forefathers meant. If you look back, I mean, barbarians, included the definition of invasion. And so I think they're on the wrong side of this. What's important, though, is Governor Abbott has declared an invasion. The issue is now what's he going to do now that he's availed himself of the self-help remedy? He hasn't quite gone far as I hope he would. Now, there's some reasons why, but there's more he could do, I believe.
Let's hope he's going to get there. I think this water well is a good first step.
He's doing great.
But I wanted to thank you for coming on the podcast. As always, it's fantastic. You are a wealth of knowledge, and I hope you will be able to come back on and talk about some more of these issues. I think everything you say is important for the American public to hear.
Matt, thanks anytime, because again, what we're doing, what we need to do is continue to educate the American people that just as, when they go and they fill their gas tank every week, they're being impacted. Trust me, you're being impacted by the border. You just don't know it.
Amen. Thank you so much.
You bet.
This is Matt O'Brien for IRLI's No Border, No Country podcast. Thank you for watching. Please stab that like button and subscribe to our channel. If you'd like to learn more about IRLI and support our mission, you can go to www.irli.org/podcast. In addition, this podcast appears on a number of other platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify. Thanks again for watching. This is Matt O'Brien for No Border, No Country.